Good evening. My name is Ogechi Chieke, Executive Director of the Sabira Cole Film Festival. On behalf of my family, we thank everyone who has supported the Sabin Film Festival over the years. Tonight, we're proud to present Tony Buba's Struggles in Steel in conjunction with the City of Asylum, one of my late aunt's most esteemed partners. Tonight is also special because it's the first program of a new organization to continue her work and honor her memory, the Sabira Cole Film Festival. After the screening, Tony Buba will be here live answering questions, so please stick around and enjoy the film.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. My name is Abby Lamberski, and I'm the Director of Programs at City of Asylum, and it is such a pleasure to gather with you this evening on City of Asylum's virtual programming channel, The Show Must Go Online. And we're really pleased to partner with the Sabira Cole Film Festival this evening and continue the work of our cherished and long-term partner, Sabira Cole. I'm also really honored to introduce Tony Buba and Wayne Gaines, the filmmaker and the audio technician of Struggles in Steel. Tony and Wayne are here. Sorry, that was me. I told them to mute and then I didn't. Look at that. Okay, I'm really honored to be here with Tony and Wayne, who are here live this evening, but from their homes or in front of their house organs. And they're here to talk about the film and to answer your questions. If you have questions for Tony and Wayne about what you just saw, please pop those questions into that answer a question button down below, and I will read them out for Tony and Wayne. But to get going, they're going to talk briefly about the making of this film and about their colleague, Ray Henderson. Mostly, they want to hear from you this evening and answer your questions, so go ahead and get started with the asking. You can also take a look at each other's questions, and you can upvote the questions that you really want answered. To get this evening started, I'm going to turn it over to Tony and Wayne.
Well, thank you, Abby. It's a pleasure and really glad to be here. This is amazing. I saw there's about 160 people watched the film, plus the big screening we had at the City of Asylum in March before the quarantine went into effect. And I'm sure Ray is like overjoyed. People are still watching this film. I'm sure Ray is also disappointed that people still have to watch this film. Wayne and I, we've been working together since 1992. And then we worked on Struggles, audio. Now Wayne and I are currently trying to work with people in Baltimore on an update of Struggles in Steel, but other issues that came up from our trips to Baltimore, Maryland. But this film is really Ray's doing. He had been collecting oral histories while he was in the mill, and when the opportunity came up when the film aired on Channel 4 that didn't have any African Americans in it, Wayne called me, and we went out with a little high-8 camera and shot, and the footage you see in black and white was shot in high-8 because of quality. I couldn't get a transfer good enough to make it color, so we used that as black and white. Then we went and shot film.
Right. So we have some questions already from the audience. The first question is from Bonita, who says, do you have any resources for the history of the Black steelworkers in J&L Aliquippa works? Because she is doing some research for a book.
There are, one of the books I would read is Dennis Dickerson's Out of this Crucible.
Out of the Crucible.
Yeah, Joe Trotter has a book. Also, John Henshaw, and I can't think of the title of his book right now because we worked closely with John when we were making the film because he was doing a thesis on African-American steelworkers. Then with Aliquippa, I can't think of the gentleman's name, but there's a museum up there, and he has everything about the Aliquippa steel mill. And there's some great. We were in Aliquippa last year. Was it last year or year? I can't. Yeah,
last year.
And we filmed in Aliquippa, and also we showed Struggles in Steel there, and we have a short, like 10-minute piece we made about some Aliquippa steelworkers. But people in Aliquippa are very knowledgeable about the mills, and you can get, and I can't think of the gentleman's name that has this museum right outside of Aliquippa.
Yeah, I can't think of his name. But also, if she just goes and just finds someone who worked in the, or a relative to someone who worked in the steel mill, there's a wealth of knowledge there. I mean, they're willing to talk with you about anything you need to know about the Aliquippa steel mill.
A great person to get in contact would be Joe West.
Joe West, right.
Joe West, he works for the Beaver County, but he's really a historian, and he knows all about the Aliquip of the works, and he's been actually trying to get one of the buildings turned into like an historical site.
Right.
And that's, I mean, could you just talk a little bit about the oral history aspect of this project? This film, you put it together through a series of oral histories with the community of steelworkers.
Right. What happened was we went out. Ray. We asked everybody about the same 20 or 30 questions, except the style of storytelling was really set by Ray Henderson in this pattern of just, the interviews sometimes lasted 2 hours or 3 hours. We rolled a lot of audio tapes, so we didn't roll film all the time. We rolled audio the whole time, and it usually started out with giving a family history, where they migrated from, and then eventually working up into their lives in the mill. And if you notice the film, it's a lot of extended takes. That's deliberate, because the gentleman we interviewed, a lot of them come from a Southern storytelling tradition, and we didn't want to impose a cutting that was more of a dominant culture type of cutting. We cut real fast, boom, 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 boom. You go to a B-roll, and the people were just up there for like 8 seconds, and you cut to something else. We wanted the stories to develop, so we let the stories go and develop in that fashion. The other decisions in doing it, and I keep telling us, is that we wanted to use close-ups of people's faces. We wanted the faces to be the landscape. So you can look at the thing, because this is 1998, and very few working people on television at that time, very few African Americans on TV. So we wanted to get a close up of the face, so you can see the textures, the colors, the skin tones, and use that as the landscape. The other decision was Wayne was doing audio. Wayne was always front and center, and Wayne could talk a little bit about that.
Well, just being front and center, it kind of gave an image that they could really talk to me and feel personable about their story. And so I found that in most cases, and we were teasing about that the other day, that they were looking at me where I really wanted them to look at the camera, and it was like, it gave them a kind of a conversation type of storytelling that really helped, I think, develop the whole film.
Great, thank you. We have a question from Mike, who is wondering about the health effects of working in the mill, and is wondering about the health conditions in general of the men that you interviewed.
Yeah, I mean, if I'd have made this film 5 years later, we couldn't have done it, because the men's health would have been too bad with dementia. I mean, one thing which you realize is, you see these gentlemen, they were at their peak in terms of being interviewed, but health-wise, I think almost everybody in the film has passed. I mean, there's some people still around, but very few. If you look, I mean, one of the things, when you go to communities like Braddock, North Braddock, where a lot of people worked in the mill, one of the, you look at the housing, maybe it's a little rundown. And some of the reasons is that because African Americans worked in the worst places in the mill, that were the most cancer ridden, the most dangerous, their life expectancy wasn't that great. So a lot died at 65, 66, 67 years old. Where my dad worked in the mill, but his job was not in the dirtiest part of the mill. He lived to be 81. So you're talking 15 years of getting a pension and a social security check, and my mother getting a social security check. So there's like almost 3 incomes coming in. For an African American family, once the husband died, the pension check was gone. You could opt to take a half pension instead of full. Most people took the full pay. That was gone, and you're down to 1 social security check versus 2 social security checks. So it's really devastating. And working in those conditions and having those health problems was really bad.
Right, and Tony, when we went down to Sparrows Point and we did that interview, well, we weren't planning to do an interview, but we ran into that lady in the morning, and her husband had just recently passed away, and she had no clue as to what to do about the finances and what all happened while he was there in the mill, whether he had a pension or any of that stuff, because he handled most of that. And once he passed, she had no clue as to what to do. What I find, and also to answer that question, if you look at those guys' faces, you can tell they didn't have a sit down at the desk type of job. These guys was working hard. Their faces showed exactly what they had been through. And then, like Tony said, a lot of them just, I know they're deceased to this day.
Wow. A lot of people are asking about where else this film is shown, how we can spread this particular resource that we still need to all see. And I know a lot of people are chatting about it being part of school curriculum in this region. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, it is. Jamal Craig, who used to work for the Steelworkers Union, he is now part of the, I'm having a senior moment, PLIN, PIM, but anyway, Jamal, he got it into the Pittsburgh school system. So it is on a curriculum of the Pittsburgh public school system. California Newsreel is the distributor, and they mostly distribute to educational markets. So it's at a lot of universities and in some public schools. And of course now with the techniques of this type of streaming, it's easier to get it out there versus what it was in 1998. But the film is still relevant. I honestly believe you can almost teach the whole history of the United States through the steel industry. And the struggles in steel just covers so much with the history of African Americans, from moving up from the South till now. The longer version has more migration stories in it.
Exactly.
Yeah, this
is it in the libraries now, Tony?
It's in the libraries, yeah. But you can order from California Newsreel, from the distributor. They're the ones that good. I think you worked with them. Didn't you, Abby, to get this together?
Mm-hmm. Yep, they were great. Very helpful.
I saw a question from Tina Marie. What type of obstacles prevented blacks from owning a steel mill? Well, yeah, steel mill is, it's capital intensive. It costs so much money. One of the reasons, what happened when the mills started shutting down, actually, there were groups in Pittsburgh and in Youngstown that wanted to buy the mills from U.S. Steel and have them be worker-owned steel mills. But U.S. Steel refused to sell to the workers. They shut it down and tore it down instead. But there was a fight. So if that would happen, I have no idea what would have gone on. And the collapse of the steel industry is really interesting in the sense that when you look at the collapse, it takes place when inflation in the late 70s, when inflation was 13 to 14%. Mm-hmm. And so instead of investing in the mills, they invested in CDs because the steel mills, even in the best of times, paid about a 6% profit. So it wasn't so to make the mills more profitable, it had to be so capital intensive. They weren't willing to put the money in the mills, and instead, U.S. Steel, I think they ended up buying Marathon Oil at the time. They divested into other industries, which was a disaster. There's a book called by John Hurt called "The Wolf Finally Came," which is a good read on the collapse of the industry.
Wayne, did you have something to add there?
Well, I was going to say foreign competition. I think that the steel mills decided they didn't want to keep pace with that and didn't want to invest into their mills. And so they said, let's let the foreign steel do whatever. They just started dumping on the American market. So it's basically where it's at.
And I remember when you gentlemen were at City of Asylum in March, we talked a lot about how the closure of the steel mill really changed the communities. And we had a lot of people who grew up in communities near the steel mill, and then their neighborhood all changed when the steel mills were closed.
Of course, any crisis always affects the African American community much worse than the white community. I mean, with COVID-19 now, because of the lack of health care is affecting, but when the mills shut down, what happened, and they discuss it, is that white workers were in different parts of the mill where they studied to become a plumber or electrician, carpentry. So they were able, when the mill shut down, some of them started their own small businesses or got on with other companies. If you're an African American worker, you weren't in the trades. You had maybe a skilled position in the mill, but who needed that position outside of the mill? There was really nowhere to go. And also for white workers, say like my dad was in the mill, working class white people were started transitioning already into blue collar or from blue collar to white collar jobs. For the African American community, it was maybe another generation away, because the father's in the mill, and if it was like having a trust fund. If your dad worked in the mill and he was a good worker, your son or daughter was guaranteed a job in the mill.
Right.
That was one of the things. And so you had the mill shut down. The father's 47 years old, loses his job. The son's or daughter's 22, they lose their job. All of a sudden, boom, the family's devastated. I mean,
Right.
this was overnight. There wasn't a gradual slowing down of this.
Right.
If they had said, okay, we're going to phase out the mill in 20 years to get prepared, then you could have an easing. But it was just, one day it was gone.
And the other thing, that there were no real retraining programs designed or geared towards, Black workers or anything like that, or for them to transition out to. So in most cases, they had to take on, once again, maintenance type jobs or, the lower paying jobs, because they just didn't have the skill set to do it. And there was no training for it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have a couple questions about unions. Jacqueline asks, from the interviews, it was clear how important the unions were at this time. For union workers now, how can union workers now be most effective for the Black community? Big question.
I think the key is to really be active in the union. And just as we're seeing a shift in Western Pennsylvania politics, the re-election of Summer Lee, the election of some of these women who are much more progressive than their old counterparts, than the Democratic Party. I think this is what needs to happen. You have some really great unions out there, like the United Electrical Union, SEIU, who are much more progressive and pushing it. And I really think you have to get involved. Like, how do you, like everything else, you have to put the time in to get involved with the union and try to move your candidates within that union office who are more progressive. And that's, in this country, the unions right now are probably one of the weakest points they've ever been in the entire history of the country. I forgot how few people are actually organized in the union. I think we're the lowest of all the industrialized countries for union membership, because it gets harder and harder to even vote a union in. You take something like UPMC. I mean, they'll spend millions of dollars on a strike-breaking firm that comes in and uses all the tactics and techniques to avoid people joining a union. Look at Amazon, what they just did to the one person trying to organize there. They fired them. I mean, the laws. I mean, we could try to maybe push our legislators to make the laws more equitable for people to even try to organize a union.
Yeah, it seems today the union is not a real popular thing, but I still think you need them. The most important thing is having a voice in the union, and the union also being a voice to that company.
That's a good point. Somebody's asking, Margie's asking, were there any white steel workers, union or otherwise, at the time of the filmmaking that were sympathetic to the Black steel workers?
Well, so the person in the film, he was talking, and yeah, I mean, there were. I mean, what we did with the film, what we didn't want to do was interview white foremen, because especially white foremen, because at that time there was a film out called Dances with the Wolves. And I use this as my reference. You watch Dances with the Wolves, everybody identifies with the Kevin Costner character, thinking if I was alive at that time, I would have been like Kevin Costner. I would have been like those soldiers killing off Native Americans. And I could see people then thinking, well, if I was a foreman in the shop, I wouldn't have discriminated against African Americans. But you have no idea what you would have done under what pressure. The times we decided we didn't want to have that in there. So we just went, and also we didn't interview any white historians, because why does something when the African American, when they tell their story, it has to be reaffirmed by a white person to give it validity? And we just didn't want to fall into that trap. So Ray and I decided on that. Also, what we did on the first day, we went out the first week of shooting. Ray then called everybody up, because our crew was integrated. And Ray called everybody up and asked all the people if they'd been more comfortable if it would be an all Black crew versus an integrated crew. And they said, no, we say exactly the same thing. This has been our mind forever. We're just so grateful that someone has given us the opportunity to get our stories out there. But yeah, I'm sure there were. I mean, a lot of people that were most sympathetic, of course, were. I mean, there were a lot of the old CPers, the old Communist Party people.
Right.
Very sympathetic.
And then when we did that interview down in Alabama, there was some, eventually there was a white worker that did, kind of go along with what they were doing and help them in their struggle. But still, they had to let them know that this was a dangerous thing. So it was a matter of what white was going to stand up and be that one to face that type of danger.
Okay, we have time for just one more question. So the last question is from Mike, who's asking, what's the situation in communities like Aliquippa and Braddock today? Are there other industries that have risen up? What's going on?
Well, Aliquippa is, I mean, take a ride out to Aliquippa and you'll see. I mean, what the whole Beaver Valley is counting on is that fracking, is the cracker plant that's going up, and it's right now. There's like, when it was going full swing for the building of it, there were 6,000 construction jobs, but the plant is supposed to end up just employing 500 people. There really hasn't anything set in to pay those kind of wages. People have shifted to the health industry, and service industry, but you're talking from people who were making $30 an hour now making, $10, $12, $11 an hour. There's a great film called American Factory that it's Julia Reichert directed it. It takes place outside of, I think it's Toledo, and a Chinese company bought an old GM plant, and the workers went to work there who originally worked in the factory when they were making $25, $30 an hour, now making $12 an hour. So nothing has really stepped in to replace those wages.
Okay. That's all we have time for tonight. Will you just remind folks one more time what's the new project that you two are working on together?
Well, it started out to be Struggles in Steel. 20 years later, still struggling. That was the working title, and it keeps going back and forth. And we found a story that is just so interesting when we were in Baltimore. The gentleman brought this up, talking about Australia, World War II in Australia, where they sent a lot of black troops, Americans, and they ended up revolting and going against the white officers. They had to call the Australian military in to put down the rebellion. And this came about because someone was researching. Nobody knew about this. It's just coming out now from World War II. And a person was researching this in Australia, couldn't figure why Lyndon Johnson had visited Australia in 1942 or 43. And this was why, because of this that took place. And actually, there's around Mercer, a camp was there where African American soldiers could not get into the movie theater, but German prisoners of war could. And so there was a revolt that took place there. So there's a whole interest. There's so much to be done. I mean, then I keep thinking about the statues that are tearing down. I mean, you look at Birmingham, Alabama. There should be a statue for the two gentlemen that started the consent decree.
Exactly.
They should have. I mean, we should have to look at putting up these statues from a history from below, not from the top, and the people who actually made this history.
Right.
Wow. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, for being here live. We're all smarter for having talked to you both.
I don't know about that.
I hope so.
And thank you all to you, our audience, for joining us this evening, and for gathering us, learning together. City of Asylum will be back on the Show Must Go Online channel tomorrow evening with Damon Young, who's curated a new series of conversations called How to Survive in America. So check out our website, www.alphabetcity.org/show, for more information and a link to register. We hope you'll join us. Good night, everyone. Have a good evening.
Good night. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody, for watching.